Om Bhuvasvaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Hello, welcome to my first long-form video on this channel. Today I want to discuss with you Samudra Manthan, the churning of the ocean of milk. Now this is a very important story in Hinduism, and it's chock full of symbolism. The story takes place back in the Satya Yuga, which was billions of years ago. It is the first of the four ages of Hinduism. Now this takes place at a time when humans lived about 16 times as long because everybody was good by today's standards, including the bad guys. Now the important players in this story are the Devas. They are demigods who represent the forces of nature: thunder, wind, water, fire, death, etc. And they are the good guys because they represent the good that exists in everyone and everything in nature. Their half-siblings, same dad, different mom, are the Asuras. Now these are, generally speaking, the bad guys. There are some exceptions because they represent the bad, or at least in Hinduism, the materialism that exists in everybody and everything in nature. The Devas and Asuras are always at war, and that represents the fact that the forces of evil and good are always fighting for control within us. Now, in this story, we will see that to walk with God is to allow the forces of good to prevail over evil. It's important to note that the Devas, they are gods, but they are not permanent gods. They only exist during the current incarnation of the universe. In Hinduism, time is not linear, it's cyclical, and every incarnation of the universe has a new set of Devas. So for example, Indra, who is similar to Zeus, he is the god of storms, thunder, rain, lightning, etc. He's the king of heavens, he's the leader of the Devas, but he is actually a title given to whoever had the best karma, and so they inherit the role of Indra throughout the existence of that particular incarnation of the universe. That is to say that while Indra does rule over the heavens and the Devas consider the heavens to be their abode, it's not a permanent situation. If you are incarnated as Indra in your next life, then you must have accrued some really amazing karma in this life. But once that karma runs out, you're going to be back in samsara. You're going to incarnate into a mortal form, and you're going to live and die and live and die. So let's talk about this story. So angry sage Durvasa, he's an enlightened being, but he's always going around cursing people who piss him off. Now, you might be wondering, why would an enlightened being be throwing curses around everywhere? The short answer is, so the story can happen. Now, in this particular story, Durvasa receives a beautiful garland that smells heavenly. It smells so good, it's so beautiful, and he finds and presents it to Indra, the king of the heavens. Indra accepts the gift and puts it on his elephant. Now, the garland smells really beautiful. It attracts all sorts of bees and flies, and the elephant gets annoyed. It throws the garland onto the ground. Durvasa sees this and he gets pissed off. So he curses Indra and all of the Devas that they are going to lose their powers. Indra loses his elephant just like that. Soon, the Asuras are finally able to overpower the Devas, and they conquer the entire universe, kicking the Devas out of heaven. What are the Devas going to do? Well, they seek help from a higher power, the highest power rather, Almighty God, who is represented as the Holy Trimurti of Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. In this case, Vishnu takes precedence because the Devas are supposed to rule heaven. The Asuras are not supposed to rule heaven. And so, in order to restore balance to the universe, Vishnu steps in to help the Devas. And this is the advice that he gives them. Obtain all the medicinal herbs of the universe and churn them into the ocean of milk. Use Mount Mandara as the churning stick and the holy serpent Vasiki as the churning rope. Promise half the rewards to the Asuras so that they will agree to help, and I will handle the rest. Now, obviously, the most literal interpretation of this is that the churning of the ocean of milk is our Milky Way galaxy itself. There are a lot of cosmological implications to this story, but we don't necessarily need to get into that. Let's continue. Enticed by the promise of half the rewards, which include the elixir of immortality, the Amrita, the Asuras agree to help their mortal enemies. Get it? They're mortal enemies, the Devas, because they lost their powers, so they're mortals now. They agree to help churn the ocean together. So together they borrow Vasiki, the serpent that's draped around Shiva's neck, and they wrap the serpent around Mount Mandara so that they can begin churning. Indra loudly announces, Devas will hold the head, Asuras will hold the tail. Now the Asuras are very proud. They have big egos, and so they say, fuck that, we don't want that. We're going to hold the head. You guys are going to hold the tail because we're awesome and you're pathetic losers. But that was a mistake. Did Indra plan this? I don't know. But what ended up happening was the serpent's toxic breath was spewing fumes into the Asuras' faces, poisoning them. Meanwhile, at the tail end, the Devas were perfectly fine. Working together, they churn the cosmos using the mountain as the churning stick. But what supports the stick? None other than Vishnu himself, who manifests as a turtle and supports the entire show on his back. Again, God is running the entire show. As they churn the cosmos, goodies are about to start popping out. But first, in order to balance all the good that's to come, a lot of bad is going to come first. The serpent Vasiki begins vomiting the most toxic poison ever imaginable, and this is going to destroy all of the world, all of the universe, from the heavens to the earth to the hells. The Devas are powerless to stop it. The Asuras are too scared that if they try to stop it, they're going to die. And so everybody is powerless and scared, and salvation comes in the form of Shiva, who steps in to save the universe. He takes the poison in his palms and he drinks it. Parvati freaks out. She sees her husband willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of the universe, so she grabs him by his throat and squeezes tight to keep the poison in his throat. So therefore he's not able to swallow it, but it turns his throat blue. Now, this has a lot of symbolic meaning, and one popular interpretation is that when you have poisonous thoughts, you should not voice them and you should not take them to heart. Just keep them in here, because if you let them go up or down, your world may be in jeopardy. A more mythological explanation of this is that this is the origin of poison and toxicity in nature. That's because the droplets that spill from Shiva's palms are consumed by snakes and scorpions and other poisonous critters that live today. Komodo dragons. With the worst of it now dealt with, the goodies are going to start coming out from the churning. Now, Vishnu divvies up the goodies, or ratnas, amongst the Devas and the Asuras, but because God favors good over evil, the Devas are going to come out with the best stuff. So first, we're going to discuss the divine elephant. Indra had an elephant, but his elephant died when they all got cursed. So now he gets a new elephant. Yay. Then there's the seven-headed horse. Indra tries to claim it, but ultimately, in the end, the horse goes to the Asura king Bali, who is the star of another important story with the dwarf avatar of Vishnu, Vaman. We'll talk about that another time. The wish-granting cow Kamdenu appears from the churning and is given to the seven sages so that they can use her milk to produce offerings for the worship of the Almighty. Apsaras, which are equivalent to nymphs in the Greek mythology, these are the female spirits of dance, and they pair up with the Gandharvas, who are the heavenly bards of Indra's court. The goddess of wine, Varuni, she joins the Asuras. The night blooming jasmine tree gets claimed by Indra and is taken to the heavens. Chandra, the moon, comes from this churning and seeks refuge with Shiva. Shiva puts Chandra on his head, and that's why in iconography you'll often see Shiva's matted hair with the crescent moon on top. Now, probably the most important of the Ratnas is Lakshmi, the almighty goddess who represents success. Everybody wants Lakshmi on their side. So you can imagine that everybody wants to fight over her and claim her. Well, Lakshmi is the almighty. She is above all of this bullshit. And so she decides to go to the one entity who has no desires whatsoever, and that's none other than the Almighty God. So she joins Vishnu as his eternal partner. And because of this, Vishnu becomes Lakshmi Narayan, which basically is one entity which represents the union of Purusha, which is consciousness, and Prakriti, which is matter. The combination of consciousness and matter produces the seed for creation. And because of that, we're going to see Vishnu unlocking certain manifesting powers shortly. Now, the primary purpose of this churning was to produce the Amrita, the elixir of life. The final Ratna is Dhanvantri, the doctor god, who appears holding in his hand the pot of Amrita. And as soon as he comes out, the Asuras snatch the pot away, and the fighting begins again. The Asuras and the Devas are fighting each other. The Asuras are also fighting amongst each other, because everybody wants to get this elixir of immortality. Whoever drinks it is going to be all-powerful. So, Vishnu said that he would handle the rest, and here's where he intervenes. He assumes the form of Mohini, a female, in order to entice the materialistic Asuras, causing them to fight amongst themselves. Now, instead of the Amrita, they're fighting over her. Meanwhile, she is distributing the Amrita amongst the Devas. How is Vishnu able to even do this? It's because Lakshmi came out of the ocean of milk and she bestowed her power to Vishnu. Vishnu, using Lakshmi's power, is able to manifest the form of Mohini by wrapping himself in Maya, the physical reality that deludes us all of our true divine nature. In doing so, he is able to, or she is able to rather, distribute the immortality amongst the Devas. Now, one of the Asuras hatches a clever scheme in which he disguises himself as a Deva in order to get some of this elixir. Surya the sun and Chandra the moon notice this, and they inform Vishnu of this treachery. Vishnu reacts by invoking his ultimate weapon, the Sudarshana Chakra, and fires it, slicing the throat of this Asura called Rahu Ketu, who now splits into two beings, Rahu and Ketu. Because they each consumed some of the Amrita, Rahu and Ketu are immortal, but they are not Devas. They do not represent celestial beings. They actually represent the lunar nodes, which are not actual planets, but they represent the causes of eclipses in astronomy. So the explanation of this is that because the sun and the moon snitched on them, they resent the sun and the moon and take vengeance by producing eclipses. After the Devas have consumed the Amrita, their powers are restored. They have immortality for the rest of the life of the universe, and they are able to finally overpower the Asuras and reconquer the heavens, kicking the Asuras out back down to the lower realms. Now, let's talk about the symbolism here, because as I said, this story is chock full of it. The forces of good and evil, which are within us fighting for control, they actually work together to achieve a common goal. Let's talk about the tools. The mountain that they use for the churning stick represents willpower and concentration. The serpent represents intellect, intention. The poison that comes out of the serpent represents the hardships that one experiences when one walks down the spiritual path. The turtle that supports the whole show represents the withdrawal of senses. Shiva's intervention in consuming the poison represents the virtues that are necessary for one to overcome hardships on the spiritual path. As far as the rewards go, the Ratnas, they can help you or they can hurt you when you're on the spiritual path. Mohini represents the ego, the Maya, the delusive world in which materialism binds us. Lakshmi represents success and abundance, but she belongs to God because Lakshmi joins Vishnu. That means that success and abundance are really up to God, and it's important for us as individuals to try our best, expend the best effort we can, but not to worry about outcomes. The Bhagavad Gita really hammers this point into us. Karma yoga means you work, you do your duty, you act, but you don't hold attachment to the outcomes, good or evil. You accept what happens. Just do your best. And obviously the most literal interpretation is that the churning of the ocean of milk represents our Milky Way galaxy, and this represents the formation of a lot of the cosmological phenomena that we appreciate today. For example, the origin of the moon. So there you have it. Samudra Manthan, the churning of the ocean of milk. Now, in contrast to the Abrahamic religions, Hinduism doesn't really have a story where there is an original sin or an angel descending from rebelling against God and falling from heaven. This is one of the really crucial and early stories in Hindu cosmology, and it represents the forces of good and evil, again, collaborating to achieve a higher goal, but they come out of this situation differently. The forces of good achieve immortality, and the forces of evil achieve suffering. And one can imagine that the sins, for example, good and evil come out of the churning. They are the fruits of this labor, but they're distributed unequally. Materialism is really the root cause of sin in Hinduism and other dharmic faiths. And it is materialism, binding oneself to the world, the physical world, and assuming that that is the reality. And that is what keeps one down. That is what chains one to suffering. And that's why certain facets of the story, for example, the poison, the goddess of wine, they hold someone back when they're trying to achieve enlightenment. On the flip side, the devas represent good. And so by rising above materialism, one can achieve a godly nature. So that's really the main takeaway from this story. And it's important to understand that, it's not about knowledge being the origin of sin or curiosity or anything like that. It's attachment to the physical world and ignorance, delusion that the physical world is reality, when in actuality, reality is far beyond the physical world. It's the spiritual world. It's beyond human comprehension, and it's our job as individuals to realize our own divine nature. So there you have it. Samudra Manthan, explained in about 20 minutes. Peace.